Okay, doke. So we expect this presentation to go on from 20 to 30 minutes. And so after that part, we're going to have a Q&A. Just a couple of ground rules for today. We would like everyone to remain muted during the presentation. After the presentation, you can put your hand up in the little hand raising feature, or if we give the go ahead, you can just start unmuting yourselves and ask a question directly. During the entire presentation, we ask for you to use the chat feature, and I will be going over the chat during the entire presentation. As soon as it's done, I'll be going over your questions. So those three methods of asking the question. Following the presentation, we'll start with questions in the chat. So after the presenter's response from questions in the chat, please raise your hand for additional oral questions. We also want to go over a brief history of CHEJ. So what we do here is we accomplish through training, such as this one, coalition building and one-on-one technical and organizing assistance. We at CHEJ work to level the playing field so that people can have a say in the environmental policies and decisions that affect their health and well-being. We help community groups research the extent of a problem and then break it down into manageable action steps. We accomplish this through scientific understanding, through community organizing, and through communications. Those are the main three subjects that we focus on through our organization. After that introduction, I want to go ahead and pass it over to Mike Schade, who will be our host for today. So go ahead and take it away, Mike.
Great, thank you so much, and thank you to CHEJ, the team, Sharon, Hunter, Stephen, the whole team at CHEJ. Really honored to be here with y'all. Give me a minute while I just try to figure out how to share my screen a minute. Just give me 1 second here. Okay, can you guys see my slides?
Yep, you're good.
Great. Wonderful. So thanks so much for everyone joining. I know everyone is very busy with the work and the issues that they work on. Really appreciate the opportunity to be here today. As Hunter had mentioned, I used to work at CHEJ. I worked there for 9 years, so being here today is a wonderful opportunity. It feels like I'm coming home to my family. So I'm going to be talking today about work that our organization does to protect communities, consumers, workers, and the environment from exposure to dangerous chemicals. Particularly, I'm going to talk about how organizers and advocates can deploy corporate or market campaigns to hold polluters accountable, and particularly opportunities to organize and campaign around PVC, the poison plastic, which of course the recent train derailment in East Palestine, Ohio, really highlighted the dangers of transporting vinyl chloride and other hazardous chemicals that are used to manufacture plastics. So the first part of my presentation will really talk about how we at Toxic Free Future have deployed corporate or market campaigns to hold polluters accountable, and how that type of strategy can be applicable to dealing with dangerous chemicals and dangerous plastics like PVC. So I've been working at Toxic Free Future since 2014, after working at CHEJ for 9 years. So TFF organizationally is very much aligned with CHEJ. We worked in collaboration or coalition with CHEJ for, gosh, almost 40 years. Some of you may know TFF originally as Washington Toxics Coalition. We originally started out as a state-based group in Washington State, and over the years have expanded and rebranded as Toxic Free Future. We're a national environmental advocacy organization that, like CHEJ, works to protect American families, communities from exposure to dangerous chemicals that can be found all around us, from chemicals that are hiding in consumer products like plastics to chemicals like PFAS that are manufactured and disposed of that have devastated the drinking water for millions of Americans. Core to our work is embedding our advocacy and organizing on science. We conduct original scientific research to shine a light on dangerous chemicals that can be found in us. For example, over the last couple of years, we've published a number of studies investigating PFAS chemicals in products like food packaging and textiles. And that scientific research really helps to inform and power our advocacy campaigns at the state level, the federal level, and in the marketplace. So organizationally, we're headquartered in Washington State, and over the last 40 years, we have gotten some of the most protective and comprehensive laws passed in the nation regulating dangerous chemicals that are out there. For example, Washington State was one of the first states in the country to ban chemicals like bisphenol A, phthalates, and most recently, PFAS. Washington was the first state in the country to ban PFAS in food packaging and firefighting foam. We also do a lot of work at the federal level. We ran a campaign for nearly 10 years to reform our nation's broken chemical safety system. And through that advocacy, President Obama signed legislation in 2016 that for the first time in generations gave EPA the legal authority to regulate and restrict harmful chemicals like asbestos, PFAS, flame retardants, and others. So a lot of our work is centered around advancing policies at the state and the federal level. And then the market transformation work is the work that I lead at Toxic Free Future, which I'm going to be talking about for the first half of my presentation. So we launched the Mind the Store campaign back in 2013 to call on the nation's biggest retailers here in the US to phase out and ban dangerous chemicals that can be harmful not only to consumers, but also to communities and workers where chemicals and materials are produced and disposed of. Now, as organizers and advocates, sometimes we may not have much political power over big chemical corporations like DuPont and 3M that manufacture dangerous chemicals, but we find that we have a lot of power and influence over the retailers that we shop at. If a company like Walmart says to jump, their suppliers undoubtedly will say how high. So the idea behind the Mind the Store, which was actually inspired by work that I did at CHEJ, was really to kind of challenge major corporations to drive toxic chemicals and toxic plastics out of their supply chain. And not only to address individual chemicals like PFAS, phthalates, bisphenol, but pushing companies to develop more comprehensive, safer chemical policies, because we're never going to solve these problems addressing them one chemical at a time, and calling on companies not only to phase out and ban and restrict dangerous chemicals and plastics, but also to ensure that the substitutes that they're transitioning to are verifiably safe. So with that said, here's a quick snapshot of the companies that we have been pushing on the campaign. When we launched the campaign back in 2013, you'll see this article from USA Today that was published when we launched the campaign. When we started the campaign, we started by focusing on the top 10 US retailers by sales. And over the years, we've steadily expanded the campaign to challenge a much larger universe of retailers to drive dangerous chemicals out of their products, packaging, and supply chains. Today, we're challenging 50 of the biggest retailers across US and Canada to get tough on toxic chemicals. We think that these retailers have a fundamental moral responsibility to ensure that the products and the packaging that they sell are safe, and they're not exposing consumers, people like you and I, to dangerous chemicals, and they're not impacting frontline communities where chemicals and products are manufactured and disposed of. So just to kind of put a couple pinpoints in some of the goals that we're working to accomplish with Mind the Store, really the biggest goal is really, again, to push companies to develop comprehensive, safer corporate chemical policies at a time when the federal government has historically failed to meaningfully protect American families from exposure to dangerous chemicals. We think that big corporations, especially retailers, can play an important role of cleaning up their supply chains and not only helping to drive dangerous chemicals and plastics out of products here in the US, but that can have major ripple effects in the global economy that we find ourselves in. At the same time, core to our approach is not only pushing these big corporations away from hazardous chemicals and plastics, but at the same time, aligning our efforts with our partners in states and at the federal level to build momentum and synergy for state and federal governmental policies to regulate and restrict some of the very same chemicals. And this is really important because we're never going to solve these problems by just focusing on one strategy. They really feed into and build off of one another. So for example, a lot of our work in recent years has been targeting retailers, challenging them to ban PFAS in products like food packaging and textiles. And in the early days of this work, back in 2017, 2018, when we started working on PFAS in food packaging, we got Washington State to be the first state in the country to ban PFAS in food packaging. Following that, we started going to retailers, companies like Whole Foods, Trader Joe's, Kroger, to say, hey, look, Washington State is doing this. We think that you should do this as well. And we started testing their products to understand whether other major retailers like Whole Foods, Trader Joe's, Kroger, and others sold food packaging that contained PFAS. And through that organizing work and campaign work that we did, we started getting retailers to join Washington in banning PFAS in food packaging. And that helped build momentum for more governmental policies at the state level banning PFAS in food packaging. And today, as a result of that work, we've won commitments from more than 24 major fast food, fast casual, and grocery store chains who are banning PFAS at more than 150,000 grocery and fast food chains, not only here in the US, but in 100 countries across the world. And at the same time, all of that market momentum has built momentum for more policies in states. So today there's about a dozen states, including New York and California and Maine and Washington and others, that have also banned PFAS in food packaging. And now we have federal legislation that is being considered that would also ban these chemicals at the federal level. And of course, there's also work happening at the international level. So core to our approach is really kind of this intersection between pushing for corporations to get out of dangerous chemicals and at the same time really aligning our campaign strategies with state and federal policy. And we think through this strategic, synergistic campaigns that can help lift all boats and hopefully help to protect communities who are hardest hit from the production and the disposal of these chemicals that end up in these products. So through the campaign, we deploy a variety of strategies and tactics to challenge retailers to improve. We both engage companies behind the scenes to provide policy recommendations and technical assistance to help them understand how they can take a leadership role to change. And then at the same time, for those companies that are not moving in a meaningful way, we will deploy different tactics to hold laggards accountable, to challenge them to improve. So one of the tools we've deployed over the years is to put out a report card that benchmarks leading retailers on their chemical policies or lack thereof. I'll be talking about that in a little bit. And we found that by publicly grading or benchmarking companies, that can help incentivize companies to improve. So it's like, in school, right? If you were a kid in school and you got a letter grade of an F or a D or a C, not so good, that can help inspire you and encourage you to improve. Similarly with retailers, by giving them letter grades, we can say, hey, here are these companies that are doing well, here are these companies that are not doing so well, and that can help inspire the laggards to step up and improve and create a sense of competition among the retailers who generally are very competitive with one another. As I mentioned, we deploy both online and in-person organizing tactics. So here's a photo of an action that we held in New York City last year as a part of National Week of Action, where we organized picketing and protests outside of REI stores across the country, calling on REI to phase out and ban PFAS in their clothing. This was at their flagship store in New York City, where we delivered You see the boxes in the middle of the photo. We delivered petitions signed by more than 100,000 REI customers and members, calling on them to end the toxic trail of PFAS pollution. And I'm proud to say about 3 or 4 months after this action, REI announced earlier this year that they're phasing out and banning PFAS in all of the textiles that they sell. Another tactic that we'll deploy to hold retailers accountable is to test their products to identify whether or not the products that they sell can contain dangerous chemicals. So for example, when I was at CHEJ, we put out a report, Sharon may recall, investing chemicals in vinyl shower curtains. And we found that vinyl shower curtains were laden with dangerous chemicals like phthalates, heavy metals, and also that new shower curtain smell that you experience when you open a shower curtain in your home. That's actually the smell of toxic chemicals being released into indoor air. And that report that we deployed at the time helped push retailers like Target and Walmart and others to commit to phasing out and banning PVC plastic in the shower curtains that they sell. And then another tactic that we deploy with our campaigning is we work with investors to hold publicly traded companies accountable. For example, we will work with investors to file shareholder resolutions at companies or send letters to businesses that they hold shares in. So for example, a couple of years ago, we were targeting McDonald's on PFAS and food packaging, and we had a pretty sophisticated, dynamic campaign. And the thing that really pushed McDonald's over the edge was we worked with investors at As You Sow to file a shareholder resolution at McDonald's. And 1 month after that shareholder resolution was filed, McDonald's announced that they would ban PFAS globally by 2025. And I'm proud to report that just a couple months ago, McDonald's revealed that they've actually achieved the ban more quickly here in the US. They've already eliminated PFAS in their packaging at all their US stores. So we deploy all these different strategies and tactics to really create a perfect storm of activity to press retailers to improve. Now, this is a quick snapshot of the retailer report card that I mentioned. I encourage folks to check it out. You can go to retailerreportcard.com to see it. As I mentioned, we found that it's been a really powerful tool by publicly grading companies that can really help drive those to improve. And here's a quick snapshot that shows some of the impact. So if you look at the bottom of the screen, in 2016, the first year we put out that scorecard, we evaluated 11 major retailers. That year, the average grade across the board was a D+, not so good. 5 years later, in 2021, the last year that we put out the scorecard, those 11 retailers had improved significantly. On average, across the board, their average grade had improved from a D+ to a B-. So it shows how the scorecard can really help press and catalyze major multinational corporations to drive dangerous chemicals out of their products and packaging. And we have a lot of examples that we can point to. Since we launched the Mind the Store program 10 years ago, we've had a lot of success in driving toxic phthalates out of vinyl flooring, flame retardants out of furniture, methylene chloride and NMP out of paint removal products sold at retail, toxic chemicals like phthalates and parabens and formaldehyde releasers out of household cleaning products and beauty and personal care products. I talked about PFAS, and also, again, not only pushing companies to restrict and phase out and ban some of the worst chemicals, but also pushing companies to develop corporate chemical policies. When we launched Mind the Store in 2013, no major US retailer had a corporate chemical policy, and I'm proud to share that since we launched the campaign, now some of the biggest retailers in America, Walmart, Target, Amazon, Sephora, Home Depot, Lowe's, Albertsons, all have comprehensive corporate chemical policies that they're now working to implement. And I want to bring it back to CHEJ, because when I worked at CHEJ for 9 years, the work that we do now at Mind the Store really builds on and is, I would say, inspired in many ways from some of the work that we did when I was at CHEJ campaigning on PVC plastic, which is what we're here to talk about today. So when I was at CHEJ, we ran national campaigns challenging brands and retailers like Target and Toys R Us to phase out and ban PVC plastic. On the left, you'll see a photo of an action that we organized outside of Target's flagship store in Brooklyn. On the right, you'll see an action that we organized with the Teamsters outside of Toys R Us at their flagship store in Times Square in New York City. And in the middle, that is the giant inflatable duck that we created at the time, Betty the Be Safe Ducky, who is the mascot of our campaign. So the work that we're doing with Mind the Store today really builds on work that I did when I was at CHEJ, pushing brands and retailers to take action on PVC. And that really brings us to kind of the next phase of the conversation. So many of us, I think, were horrified when we saw the news in East Palestine earlier this year when train cars containing vinyl chloride and PVC plastic caught on fire and were intentionally detonated, releasing a massive plume of toxic chemicals, including vinyl chloride, undoubtedly dioxins, and other toxic byproducts. And this connects back to this past work on PVC because over 99% of vinyl chloride that is manufactured here in the United States is used to manufacture PVC vinyl plastic. And it's kind of funny because when I worked at CHEJ for years, so much of my work was focused on PVC. And since I've been working with Mind the Store, I've really, kind of shifted to looking at other chemicals that we thought we can be successful on, chemicals like flame retardants and PFAS and phthalates. And I think for many of us in the environmental health and justice communities, the tragedy and the disaster in East Palestine is really a painful reminder of the dangers of transporting and manufacturing chemicals like vinyl chloride that are used to make vinyl plastic. So I want to kind of shift gears a little bit to talk about some research that we've put out a couple of months ago, really to kind of point out that as terrible of a disaster East Palestine was and continues to be, we see that people that live in East Palestine and communities nearby are continuing to be impacted by this terrible disaster, which sadly the Biden EPA has done an incredibly poor job of responding to. And that's why groups like the Unity Council and others are calling on the Biden administration to declare an emergency declaration so that communities in East Palestine and nearby can be made whole. I think it's important to note that, yes, we need to be working with and supporting those communities. We also think it's an opportunity to highlight that East Palestine was not an isolated incident, that over the last 30, 40 years, other communities around the US have also been impacted by pollution from the very same chemical companies that manufacture the chemicals that derailed and were purposely lit on fire in East Palestine. So this April, our organization put out a report to really try to connect the dots between the East Palestine disaster, and that's what I want to talk about now is, what did we find from this investigation? We thought it was really an opportunity to say East Palestine was awful, but at the same time, other communities around the US are being impacted by the very same chemicals. One of the things that was really interesting to me was that when I was at CHJ back in, I think it was in 2012 or 2013, there was also a terrible train derailment in Paulsboro, New Jersey that Stephen Lester and I at CHJ worked on. And one of the things that we discovered as we were working on this report, and also as journalists at the New York Times, one of the things that we eventually learned was that if you took a look back at this train derailment in Paulsboro, New Jersey, which you see pictured here, where train cars containing vinyl chloride also derailed, there was a massive plume of vinyl chloride. Many first responders were sickened, many residents of the town got sick. In fact, there was an elderly woman who died, which was believed to be attributable to vinyl chloride exposure. One of the things that we found in the research and something that the New York Times helped uncover was that the train cars that derailed in Paulsboro, New Jersey, were heading to a Occidental petroleum plant in Pedricktown, New Jersey. And one of the things that is incredibly ironic is that the train cars that derailed in East Palestine were going to the very same Occidental chemical plant in New Jersey. And this is all also connected back to Love Canal because Occidental Chemical, who inherited Hooker Chemical, was essentially the same company that was responsible for the Love Canal disaster. And Occidental Chemical historically has been one of the worst vinyl chloride polluters in the United States. Most recently, our research revealed that Oxy released more than 59,000 pounds of vinyl chloride into the air at their chemical plants in New Jersey and in Texas and other places around the country. It's also worth noting that the vinyl chloride that was traveling through Ohio when it derailed, it was actually coming from a plant in outside of Houston, Texas, in a community that could be characterized as an environmental justice community. And there was actually a really great story in the New York Times that covered our report that looked at the impacts that Oxy has had on communities in Houston, Texas. One of the other things that I think is interesting and notable about the Ohio derailment was there were also 3 train cars containing PVC pellets that also derailed and burned. And that's a big concern because when PVC plastic burns in uncontrolled conditions, they can release dioxins and other toxic byproducts. And when we looked at the train manifests for the derailment, we found out that those were Shintech pellets. Shintech is one of the biggest producers of PVC in the US and the world. And those pellets were heading to a PVC pipe manufacturer in Pennsylvania, a company by the name of JM Eagle. They're one of the biggest producers of PVC piping in the US. And Shintech, whose PVC pellets derailed and burned, they're also a major vinyl chloride polluter. In fact, they were reported releasing more than 45,000 pounds of vinyl chloride into the air. So why are we concerned about vinyl chloride? Vinyl chloride is a extremely dangerous chemical. It's a known human carcinogen. So that means it can cause cancer to people. And that's a big concern for workers who work in vinyl chloride plants, but also community members that live on the fence line of vinyl production plants. As I mentioned, the research that we put out revealed that the pollution in Ohio was not an isolated incident. Today, there are 19 vinyl chloride and PVC resin factories that operate in the United States, and together they produce between 10 and 20 billion pounds of vinyl chloride in the United States a year. 10 to 20 billion pounds of a known human carcinogen. And this production is it's not a closed loop operation. Our research revealed that these plants self-reported releasing more than 400,000 pounds of vinyl chloride into the air in 1 year alone. On the right, you'll see a photo of a vinyl chloride plant in Texas. That's a Formosa plant in Point Comfort, Texas, that has been an egregious polluter of vinyl chloride, as well as PVC pellets, which they've been fined by the feds for discharging their pellets into local water bodies in Texas. And it's worth noting again that 99% of this vinyl chloride is used to make this plastic, this unnecessary cheap plastic. The number one use of this plastic is in building materials like vinyl piping and flooring. In fact, piping is the number one end market use. So this here is a quick snapshot. Oh, excuse me, I'm having a little bit of a technical snafu. Give me a second here. Can you guys still hear me here, I hope?
Yes, we can still hear you until Z.
Great, give me a second here. Sorry about that. Gotta love technical snafus as you're... So this here is a quick snapshot of who are the biggest corporate polluters of vinyl chloride in the United States. So we talked about Occidental, we talked about Shintech, Westlake Chemical, we found is the #1 polluter of vinyl chloride in the US. They operate a number of plants around the US in Cantarelli, Louisiana. They have plants in Lake Charles, Louisiana, Plaquemine, Louisiana area. Their biggest plants are in Kentucky, Point Comfort, Texas. And these are the other biggest polluters of vinyl chloride in the US: Formosa Plastics, Occidental, Shintech, and then a company by Orbia, who used to be known as Mexichem. One of the other things that we put out in this report, really to help empower grassroots activists like some of you, was really to help people understand, where is vinyl chloride manufactured in the US? What are the demographics for people that live in these communities around vinyl plants? For example, how many people live near these plants? What percentage of folks in these communities are children who may be vulnerable to chemical exposure? What percentage of folks near these plants are communities of color? What percentage of folks are at or below the federal poverty line? So we've developed this interactive map, which you can access in the link below. Perhaps we'll try to put it in the chat during the presentation. And you can actually click on any one of these facilities and zoom in, as you'll see on the right, and you can see where these plants are located, how they're in close proximity to local communities, water bodies, and then what are their emissions of vinyl chloride, but also what are their waste products and where do they send their chlorinated waste products for disposal in incinerators and landfills, because we know that when the plastics industry sends their waste to incinerators and landfills, such as the incinerator in East Liverpool, Ohio, which we know has been a big dioxin hotspot over the years. We know that dangerous chemicals like dioxins and other hazardous substances can be released into local communities. We've touched on this a little bit, but I just want to highlight that one of the other key findings of our report was these plants around the US where vinyl chloride and PVC plastic are manufactured. This is a major issue of environmental justice and racism. We found that there are over 370,000 US residents that live within 3 miles of a vinyl chloride PVC production or PVC waste disposal facility. On the right, you'll see a photo of residents of Lake Charles, Louisiana, children who live near some of the biggest polluters of vinyl chloride in the country. And unfortunately, most people that live in close proximity to these plants are folks of color. On average, 63% of folks that live near vinyl production or disposal sites are people of color. That's compared to the national average of 41%. So that's 22 points higher. And then at the same time, residents of these areas also earn an annual average income 37% below the national average. So again, this is a major issue of equity and environmental injustice and racism. Since we've put out our report, it's gotten some decent coverage in the press. We landed front page stories, as you'll see pictured here, in the New York Times, as well as in USA Today. The Times story, I thought, did a really great job of highlighting the impacts of making PVC, particularly on communities in Texas, where the vinyl chloride originated from before it derailed in Ohio. And beginning to shift gears, I want to note that this is an issue that is not only relevant for communities and the workers near these plants, but we as US residents all have a role to play, because all of us, sadly, have products in our homes and our lives that are related. 99% of PVC is used 99% of vinyl chloride is used to make PVC plastic. And most of that ends up in building materials that we can find in our homes, like vinyl flooring, siding, piping. It could also be found in other things like packaging, children's products, home products like shower curtains, inflatable pool toys, and also electronics. So when we as consumers buy products or use products that are made with this dangerous plastic, we are undoubtedly and indirectly contributing to the impacts that the production and the disposal of this plastic is having on frontline environmental justice communities. And that's not to say that we're to blame, right? It's the corporations that make this stuff and sell this stuff, and our government that has failed to meaningfully regulate these chemicals, who really, I think, deserve our attention. But I just wanted to note this, that this is not just about these communities, but all of us are directly connected to places like East Palestine and Pedricktown, New Jersey, and Mossville, Louisiana, where these chemicals have impacted, sadly. I also want to note that it's also a consumer safety issue. There are many studies that are out there that have documented that vinyl plastic products contain a witch's brew of toxic additives that can migrate or leach out. Some of the chemicals we're most concerned about are phthalates. Roughly 90% of phthalates are used to soften vinyl plastic. And when we have flexible vinyl products in our homes, we as consumers can be exposed to these chemicals. They can migrate out, they can evaporate out, and they tend to accumulate in indoor air and household dust. And we, as US residents, can be then exposed to these chemicals. According to the CDC, more than 95% of US residents have measurable levels of these chemicals, phthalates, in their bodies. They've been found in infant cord blood, they've been found in babies as they're born, they've even been found in women's breast milk. That's not to say that women should stop breastfeeding, but it's worth noting that all of us are impacted by this. It's not, again, just these communities where this stuff is made or disposed of. And then also, as I noted earlier, there's no safe disposal. When PVC plastic burns in landfills, when it's disposed in incinerators, cancer-causing dioxins can be released into the air. They can travel hundreds of miles through the atmosphere. They land on soil, they build up in crops, and animals that eat those crops, these chemicals can build up in their bodies. Dioxins, which are released when PVC burns, incinerates. Dioxins tend to build up in the food chain, and the meat and the dairy industry is one of the biggest sources of dioxin contamination. And when we, as Americans, when we eat dairy products, meat products, we in turn are exposed to these very same chemicals. So from production to use to disposal, this plastic pollutes, and everyone is being impacted, whether it's frontline communities where this stuff is made or disposed of, but also ordinary US residents who could be exposed to toxic additives from using vinyl products or from the eventual disposal and the buildup of chemicals in the food supply. So in closing, it's not all doom and gloom. There are safer solutions within reach. There are safer alternatives that are available. As I mentioned, the number one use of PVC is in building materials. There are a lot of resources that are out there about safer alternatives to PVC in building materials. Here's a link to a resource that our friends at the Healthy Building Network has put out, evaluating the safety of alternatives to PVC in different product categories. It's a little hard to see here, but if you look on the bottom right, the materials in red are PVC plastic and then some other substances of concern that are commonly found in flooring. But then if you look at the top, safer solutions for flooring include linoleum, which is a bio-based material sourced from linseed oil, which is not only a more sustainable material, but actually lasts longer than vinyl. So it's sustainable from a number of different ways. So the good news is we don't need to be using this poison plastic. While it's a cheap plastic, it's toxic and costly to our health and environment. There have been governmental policies introduced around cities and states and internationally. As organizers and activists, I think that we can do good work in the years ahead to advocate for policies at the local level and the state level to ban PVC in packaging and building materials. I know a number of states this year have introduced policies that would ban PVC in packaging. Some states are beginning to look at products And then kind of circling back to the beginning of my presentation, we're calling on retailers to enact policies to phase out PVC plastic in consumer products and packaging, but especially building materials, because that's the number one end market use for this poison plastic. So what can you do? Um, there are solutions that are out there. There are a lot of great resources. When I was at CHEJ, we put out a lot of fact sheets and reports on PVC. So I put a link there at the top to that. I also put in a link to our report, as well as another report that our friend at Beyond Plastics did earlier this year, looking at the dangers of PVC pipes. One easy thing that all of us can do after this call is to share this new report that we put out a couple of months ago. There's a link to the report. I'll put a link in the chat after I complete my talk. So that's one easy thing that we can all do, is to share the report on social media. If some of you have websites for your organizations, you can blog about it, you can include it in your email newsletters. But really, we need governmental policies, and we need policies enacted by major corporations to phase out and ban this poison plastic. We've done it before with other chemicals. We know we can do it again with this dangerous plastic. The East Palestine disaster was a terrible tragedy. People there are continuing to suffer. I know that we here at TFF and CHEJ, I know, are continuing to work with folks in East Palestine to help them and give them the justice that they deserve. And at the same time, we really need to be advocating for solutions at the local and the state and the federal level and in corporate America to ensure that no other community has to go through what happened in East Palestine. And that's why we need to advocate for policies to phase out and ban this dangerous plastic. So that concludes my presentation. Sorry, I went a little longer than I hoped. Here's my contact information. Feel free to email me, and I'm happy to answer any questions that may have come up.
Okay, I just want to let everyone know, as soon as this is over, probably within the week, maybe within a couple of days, everyone will receive this recording and the slides presented during this recording. So all these links work, right, Mike? Okay, you're on mute.
Yeah, and I'll put a link in the chat to the report we put out so that folks can see that. And again, yeah, folks are able to share it on social media. That's one easy thing that we all can do to take action following today's conversation.
Well, thank you very much, Mike. Really appreciate it. I'm gonna go over some questions in the chat because there's only a few, and then we'll move to hands. So first question is by Jamie Hicks. He lives near a chemical plant that blew up and spread chemicals all throughout their town. What do you do when the EPA, IEPA, IEEMA, et cetera, mayors, local government continue to cover up the incident and the power a company has over a small town?
Yeah, well, thank you for that question, Jamie. And I don't think there's an easy answer. And I'm sorry to hear that your community has gone through that. I've worked with many folks in similar situations over the years that have dealt with similar tragedies, and it's terrible. I think the number one answer is you need to organize. Unless you and other residents come together to demand and hold local leaders and polluters accountable, nothing is going to get done. We've seen this time and time again through history, and we know that when local residents band together and organize themselves, form local community groups, and work together to identify solutions to the problems that you're facing, that's the only way that you're going to solve this problem. The good news is that there are a lot of organizations that are out there that can help you. I know that CHEJ has a lot of great guidebooks and resources that can help you get organized if your organization, if you don't already have a local organization. I know that Stephen Lester at CHEJ has been providing technical assistance to frontline community groups for something like 40 years at this point. And then there are a lot of other organizations that are out there as well that are doing work to provide support to communities facing chemical plant disasters. There's a coalition to prevent chemical disasters, which Coming Clean has helped pull together, and they're working on comprehensive solutions at the federal level to prevent chemical disasters from going forward. But I really think coming together and organizing yourselves into a local community group is really the number one thing that you can do. And if you've already done that, I'm sure that Stephen and the folks at CHEJ can help you think more deeply. Um, and I'm happy to also be in touch with you if you want to email me. I might have some ideas because I've done work with folks in similar situations that have dealt with chemical plant disasters, but it's not easy. I mean, it's not. There's no silver bullet. I don't want to gloss it over and make it seem like it's a simple solution. So I feel for you, but I appreciate the question.
To build off of
I don't
that,
know if
Mike,
folks at
um,
CHG want to add to that.
yeah, to build off of that, I put a link to our resource library in the chat so you can go through. They're all free PDFs. We have actually 3 books on what Mike was talking about organizing, so you can peruse through those to get ideas. Also, CHEJ, we offer free consultations on how to organize. We have an in-house organizer. Her name is Teresa Mills. If you want, we could do a one-on-one call and go specifically over your problem and help you come up with a strategic plan.
Yeah, yeah. And Teresa, by the way, is fantastic. She's been dealing with similar problems for decades in Ohio, and she's excellent.
So next question from Elaine's, I hope I say it, Samino. So on August 26th or August 6th, 2023, a Albuquerque, New Mexico plant caught on fire. There was no warning to residents. So is it common for a city to not have an emergency evacuation plan?
Oh, that's interesting. I'm curious, is this a community where there's, you know, cluster of industrial facilities where there's regularly accidents, or is this kind of a more of a isolated situation?
I'm not sure. Elaine, if you want to speak on this, you can. I am.
Maybe her phone isn't working. I think it's not uncommon. I mean, we've seen time and time again.
If I could say something, I'm kind of included in that comment.
Hmm.
Karis, I'm not. I just commented because the same thing happened to us here. Chemical plant blew up, and no residents were notified until hours after the plant was on fire because they
Hmm.
didn't go through the appropriate channels. There was no evacuation plans.
Oh,
It's
wow.
been 8 months. There's still no safety plans. There's still no community right to know act stuff.
Hmm.
This company is small. Where I live, it's one company in the middle of a residential town on a Superfund site.
Hmm.
Our town has been contaminated by said company and relatives, but they don't have to pay the price for it. So
Hmm.
this plant blows up. This stuff goes up in the air. It's all over our town. Nobody's being notified. Like shelter in place was put into place, but nobody. We were all looking on social media to find out stuff. Our
Yeah.
radio wasn't saying nothing.
Oh,
All
wow.
this stuff is supposed to be in place from all the stuff that I've been reading. And laws are being broke. And I've been advocating for 8 months, and nobody is doing anything to hold
Hmm.
this company accountable for what happened.
Yeah, that's
It's
an
it's
awful
I would like
situation.
I would
One
probably
resource that
email, email you and then talk to you guys a little bit further
Yeah,
on
definitely. I'm happy to chat, and I'm also strongly recommend you connect with Teresa at CHJ because I know she's dealt with major accidents at industrial facilities over the years.
I mean,
One
I've
thing,
had Sierra Club involved. I've had I brought the Sierra Club to my city meetings. They've exposed and said that these things are wrong, and the EPA and the IEPA, they're all covering up for said company because they own, they sell all the product to the USA. They own the Western Hemisphere, this small company in our town. Controls the water, products that go into our water.
What company is it? I'm curious.
Karis Chemical in LaSalle, Illinois.
Okay. Two thoughts. So you're in Illinois.
Mhm.
How is your attorney general in Illinois?
On his website, it seems like he's all for the environmental stuff. But I've tried to email them, through their thing and kind of get some advice. They will not email me back.
That's
Every
frustrating.
agent, every agency that I go to, I have FOIAs of lies and deceit and deception and the stuff not happening because of COVID and permits not being in place and plume in the town, and I've exposed it all and nobody's doing anything. And right now they got a containment pond with a pipe that's the levee's ready to break into the Little Vermilion River. I've exposed this with drone footage. I've exposed it with people going down there and actually videoing water seeping out of the bank. This pond is like bright green and it's discharging into a river. And my councilmen don't care. My mayor don't care. They got a permit this thick. I asked somebody to read it. A month ago, I come back to the meeting yesterday and said, did anybody read the permit? Nope. Really? You guys put this ordinance in on this permit. So I can't get anybody to hold this company responsible, not to mention the damage they've done to our homes. 14,000 in my truck. I'm 60 grand in my house right now, and we're still going. And that's just me. So it's like, where do you turn to? And we've protested, and like I said, I've had the Sierra Club. We pushed to get air monitor. I shut down a truck route where they were hauling illegal chemicals, and I've been doing a lot, but nobody's doing nothing. Nobody's holding nobody accountable. And safety plans are, I mean, you're in our town. We got houses that are literally 50 feet away from that building. And when the fire went off, there was an alarm coming from that place. One, I got the fire marshal video. There's no sprinkler system. There's nothing. They totally failed us. And they're being slapped on the hand and trying to get everybody's covered. I'm talking state's attorneys, police, everybody. There's nowhere to go. I don't know where to go from here. And that's trouble. I mean, I even started a YouTube page, Facebook page. I post stuff every day. I do lives. I bring new stuff 8 months. I'm still digging and I'm still finding dirt. I'm learning how to read these echo charts and get into the EPA stuff and FOIA and I'm learning so much and I'm exposing so much, but EPA, IEPA, local government, they hired our police department to help them truck semi loads of chemicals down a dead end street out of a Superfund, a building that was behind a Superfund fence, and nobody was supposed to be back there. Here it was a tier 2 chemical storage facility that they'd never told nobody about. And then I exposed it.
Hey, Jamie.
Yeah,
I
know.
really appreciate.
I'm sorry.
I really recommend that you email me. I put my email address into the chat, and then we talk with Teresa. And
Okay.
I want you to know we really appreciate what you were telling about, and it sucks. Like, this all sucks. We all understand that what you're going through just really sucks. But we got to keep going, and you can talk
I'm
to
sorry.
us. You can, and it's perfectly fine. Just
Sorry,
email us.
everybody. Y'all
Contact
again.
Teresa. Mike, we still, it seems like we have one more hand. Would you care to donate 5 more minutes to this one more person? What would you like to do?
Sure.
So, Darlene, I think you'll be our last one. And again, we really appreciate you, Jamie.
Oh, thank you for taking my question. Mike, I'm Darlene Chanfel. I do live in Washington State, Sequim, Washington. And I've worked with your organization since its beginning, actually. So a couple comments on your PowerPoint. You might want to add a few bullet points. First of all, when something goes up in the air, it does not stay in the community. It circulates around the globe. That is a critical point to make. So if something's in Ohio up in the air, everybody else is getting it throughout the world. And you can see those maps. And that's an important point to make. The other thing is talking about PVCs and plastics. Aquaculture, whether raising finfish or raising shellfish, PVC and the nettings, tons, and I'm talking probably millions of tons, are dumped into the water and used to raise these animals. And the plastic gets right into them. Plastic shaves off with wave action, winds up in the water, and all wildlife is eating it and circulates back into the food chain for humans as well. And then thirdly, I can remember the farmers markets. It's really sad because there's so many thankfully organic farmers, but they're using plastic to put their food in. And in my little market here in Sequim, Washington, I've been speaking about this to the farmers. Only one has bothered to bring paper bags instead. So that's another avenue you might want to press on. These farmers markets, they really need to shed the plastic that they're using. Thank you for listening.
Yeah, I think those are all really great points. And I think you did a good job enumerating how all of this is connected. It's not just about the communities that are impacted from production and disposal, but how chemicals from plastics are getting into the water, they're getting into the oceans, they're impacting fish and wildlife. And as a result of all of this, all of us are being impacted. All of us are on the front line, whether or not you live near a chemical plant, because these chemicals are so persistent, bioaccumulative, and toxic. All of us are being impacted. And that's why we really need to be boldly demanding comprehensive solutions in government and in corporate America to turn the tide on toxic plastics like PVC. PVC, of course, is not the only dangerous plastic. All plastics have major environmental and public health impacts. But we know that from research, PVC is considered to be the worst plastic for our health and environment. And I think the East Palestine disaster really helped underline the risks of manufacturing, transporting chemicals that are used for this poison plastic.
Well, thank you everyone for attending this training call. Again, we will receive in your emails, whoever RSVP'd will receive a link to this recording. They will also get the slides and any other resources Mike thinks is important, you'll also receive. So thank you all very much for attending, and please reach out to CHEJ or Mike if you all need any further help. Thank you all again.
Thanks all.